My baby passed away just 1 month after he was born. I don't have it in me to relive the details right now, but I'll never forget the sound of my wife's tears. Those cries are seared into my soul. Grief, it's a beast, a terrifyingly ugly one. When we lost him, it was like my wife was tearing pieces of herself out, bit by bit. Her cries were sharp enough to shatter glass, loud enough to chill the blood. They morphed into screams, screams at the universe, at some cruel higher power that let this happen, at me, at herself. She screamed until her voice was shredded, until her throat couldn't take anymore. I have to admit, I didn't cry. I can't even say if a single tear fell from my eyes. It wasn't because I didn't feel the pain. I think it was because she was crying enough for both of us. There's nothing in this world more shared than the sound of a grieving mother's anguish. I wish there was a guidebook, something like Grieving for Dummies. Maybe then I could have been ready for what came before and after. In the before, you just wait. You sit there helplessly, watching the sands of time fall through an hourglass until it's empty. I could still feel my heart pounding as his monitor flatlined. It crashed into me like a tidal wave. I'm going to have to grieve him, I thought. The weight of it was there before I could even fully process it. The thought consumed me. I knew that in a matter of seconds, my life was going to feel like a battle every single day. Maybe I had already started grieving him before he left us. Maybe I thought I was ready, but honestly, I don't think anyone ever really is. Then comes the after. It's not the moment you walk out of that hospital room or drive home. It's when you step through your front door. That's when you feel it. The air gets sucked out of your lungs. You stand there and let that gaping void hit you, in your chest, in your marriage, in your home. That's when it sinks in. This is my life now. This is real. What made it worse was that this new reality didn't feel entirely unfamiliar. It reminded me of where I was a month ago, before he came into our lives. I hated myself for it. I wasn't mourning the baby we lost. I was mourning everything he could have been. I grieved for the birthdays that would never come, the steps he'd never take, the graduations he'd never walk across a stage for. Hell, I would have given anything to deal with teenage tantrums instead of this. My wife's grief was different, though. She longed for the closeness they shared, holding him, humming him to sleep, even those exhausting nights when she'd drag herself out of bed at 3 a.m. to soothe his cries. We never sat down and talked about it, but it was clear we were traveling separate paths in our grief. We stopped facing each other in bed. She'd pull away when I reached for her, like my touch physically hurt her. I could tell she needed space, and I tried to respect that. The funeral, that was its own kind of hell. Actually, no. I think I'd prefer burning in hell to standing at the funeral of my own child. At least hell would be warm. Grief is cold. It's bone deep, icy cold. I remember walking up to his tiny casket alone, staring down at him. All I could think was, caskets shouldn't be this small. It was so small I could have carried it in my arms. And when they lowered him into the ground, the cries erupted again. My wife's wails filled the clear morning air, so raw it felt like the loss was happening all over again. But this time, she didn't fall into my arms. She crumbled to the ground, as if she wanted to go with him. And then you open that front door again. The void feels even larger, the pain even more real. We packed up his nursery, his entire future, into boxes. We argued over what to do with it all. She wanted to put it in the attic, but I couldn't stand the thought of ever going up there again. So we left it. The door to his room stayed shut, gathering dust. It was never locked, just closed. I think, in some way, it represented our grief. We had shut the door on that chapter of our lives, but we weren't ready to lock it away forever. Each day didn't necessarily get easier. It just felt like more distance from the day it all happened. But that weight of grief, it was always there. Mornings hit the hardest. You'd wake up, crack your eyes open, and let the sunlight spill in, only for reality to slam into you like a freight train. You're grieving, like you could ever forget. The tiniest things started setting us off. If one of us forgot to do the dishes, it would spiral into a fight that left someone sleeping on the couch or taking a long drive in the dead of night just to cool off. We tried couples therapy, but honestly, we needed so much more than that. It wasn't about us. It was always about him. He was the wedge that kept driving us apart, even though it wasn't his fault. I was at my breaking point, desperate to figure out how to handle it all, but it turned out my wife was one step ahead of me, or so I thought. One evening, I came home from work and heard a soft humming coming from our bedroom. My brow furrowed as I climbed the stairs. I hadn't heard her hum that tune since the hospital, right before the monitor hummed back its last sound. When I nudged the bedroom door open, it felt like I'd stumbled into a dream. She was lying in bed, cradling a baby in her arms, looking down at it with a tenderness that seemed to hold the entire universe. I froze, pinching my thigh to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The sting told me I wasn't. She was so lost in her moment, she didn't even notice me standing there. I could have stayed rooted to that spot for hours, and she still wouldn't have looked up. I finally managed to whisper. Her eyes lifted slowly, and then she smiled, a smile that felt so foreign on her face. "Oh, hi," she said softly, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I hesitated. What are you holding?" "This." She glanced down and chuckled nervously. "It's a reborn doll." Her explanation didn't clear things up for me. My brow arched on instinct. "They're these realistic dolls for mothers to help cope," she stammered, nodding quickly as her smile wavered. I could feel the air in the room shift. It was like I had shattered some fragile illusion just by asking. "Oh," was all I could manage. I couldn't stop staring at the doll and at her, watching the way she gazed at it. She held it like it was our son, as if it wasn't just a lifeless piece of plastic. "Has it helped?" I asked cautiously. She nodded again, this time more softly. "I've only had it for a few hours, but yeah, it's comforting." At first, the whole thing unsettled me. It didn't feel right. But then again, nothing else we'd tried was working. If this helped even a little, I wasn't about to stand in the way. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked. Her question caught me off guard. I hesitated, standing there like I'd hit a fork in the road. On one hand, I didn't think I could hold that doll and see it the way she did. It wasn't my son, and I couldn't pretend it was. But this wasn't about me. It was about her. So, despite my hesitation, I walked over and stretched out my arms. The moment the doll's cold, lifeless skin touched my hands, a chill ran down my spine. I cradled it close, staring down at its eerily realistic features. And then, out of nowhere, I broke. I crumbled into tears, sobbing so hard my knees gave out. I dropped to the floor with the doll still in my shaking arms. It wasn't my son, I knew that. But holding it made me realize how much I missed him. Not just the life we lost, but him. The weight of that realization crushed me. My face was soaked with tears as I let out cries I didn't even know I was capable of. My voice cracked with each shuddering sob, raw and unfiltered. And my wife, she didn't say a word. She just waited patiently as I let it all out. That day marked the beginning of something different. Things didn't magically fix themselves, and the voids in our hearts weren't suddenly filled. But for a little while, something stood in those empty spaces, keeping the worst of the pain at bay. When my wife had days where even standing felt like too much, she'd pick up that doll. She'd hold it, hum to it, and sometimes, even though it broke my heart to see it, she'd pretend to breastfeed it. I have to admit, the whole thing still unsettled me. Sure, it was comforting in a strange way, but I couldn't shake the truth. It wasn't him. And that's when I think the wedge between us started to drive even deeper. One evening, I came home and headed upstairs, only to stop dead in my tracks. Light was spilling out from that door. My chest tightened. We both knew it was unlocked, but I never thought either of us would actually open it. Not this soon. Swallowing hard, I approached the door, my hand hesitating on the knob before I pushed it open. The sight inside made my stomach twist. Empty boxes were stacked in the corner. But the rest of the room? It was fully set up, the nursery restored to how it once was. As I stepped inside, a heavy sense of unease settled over me. My eyes scanned the room until they landed on the crib. Something was lying in it. Slowly, I wrapped my hands around the crib's railing and leaned in. The doll was there, nestled under a blanket. "I didn't hear you come in." I jumped, whipping around to see my wife, Lily, standing in the doorway. "Jesus, you scared me," I stammered, my heart racing. "What is this?" "What do you mean?" she asked casually. This room." Why is everything unpacked? She tilted her head, as if I'd asked something absurd. Our baby needs a nursery. We stared at each other in silence, her words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I began carefully. I've done some reading about these dolls, and I get it. I understand how they can help. And yeah, I'll admit, it's helped me a little too. But this? You know this isn't. This isn't what? She snapped, cutting me off. Her sharp tone left me fumbling for words. I'm just concerned. I finished weakly. I unpacked everything myself, she said coldly. And I'll put it all back when I'm ready. Okay. Her eyes pierced through me, daring me to push further. A million thoughts crowded my mind, but all I could manage was a quiet, okay. She nodded once, then added, I think I need some alone time with him. Without another word, I stepped aside, slipping past her and out of the room. I really was, to be patient with her. But the lengths she was going to? Pretending this was our child might be helping her. But it was only making things worse for me. That night, we didn't exchange a single word in bed. I lay facing the window, staring at the moonlight filtering through the blinds. She was turned the other way, facing the baby monitor she'd put fresh batteries in earlier. Eventually, I drifted off, making shapes out of the moonlight until sleep claimed me. Sometime in the middle of the night, I felt myself pulling out of a dream. My eyes creaked open, the dim glow of the moon still lighting the room. At first, everything was silent, until the faint sound of crying came through the baby monitor. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as I stared at the monitor. The static-filled cries sent a shiver down my spine. Lily, I whispered, nudging my wife awake. Wake up, she groaned, pushing her sleep mask up onto her forehead as she squinted at the monitor. My wide-eyed gaze darted from her back to the screen. She sighed, tossed the mask onto the dresser, and stood up. I'll handle him, she mumbled. Get some rest. I watched in stunned silence as she left the room, her footsteps fading toward the nursery. Her voice soon came through the monitor. It's okay, she murmured, her soothing tone accompanied by soft humming. The crying gradually stopped. I blinked, frozen in place, listening to the static and her voice until she returned to the bedroom. Without a word, she slipped her mask back on and lay down beside me. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my eyes dry and bloodshot by the time dawn broke. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. When it was finally time to get ready for work, I moved through the motions like a robot. As I passed the nursery, I paused, pressing my ear against the door. Nothing. Absolute silence. I don't know what I was expecting to hear. Honestly, I didn't even know what I heard last night. Would hearing it again have reassured me or driven me further into madness? Work that day was a haze. I nodded off at my desk, barely able to follow conversations. Everything felt like one long, meaningless blur. But the thought of last night never left me. I wanted to ask Lily what had really happened, but deep down, I was afraid of her answer. What if she told me it was normal because that doll is our son? When I got home, I felt like collapsing. Lily was at the sink, washing dishes. She glanced over her shoulder as I walked in. Hey, hon, she greeted warmly. Hi, I replied, my voice flat. How was work? A same old, I muttered. She turned back to the sink. Be quiet when you go upstairs. I just put him down. It wasn't easy, she added with a light chuckle. I swallowed hard. I'll be careful not to wake him. She shot me a brief glare before returning to the dishes. I cleared my throat and headed upstairs, each creaking step feeling like it echoed too loudly. Passing the nursery door made my breath hitch, the weight of it pressing on me like a heavy hand. Dinner that night was suffocatingly quiet. The only sounds were the occasional clinks of forks on plates or sips from glasses. I was thinking of taking him to a mommy and me class, she said suddenly. I looked up, my chewing slowing. That sounds good, I replied, forcing a smile. Her weak laugh made my stomach twist. I also wish you'd spend more time with him. You avoid the nursery like it's cursed. I'll work on that, I promised, though the words felt hollow. Thank you, she said softly. Her face told me everything. She was really trying to hold it together. I felt a pang of guilt for not being more understanding, but it was hard when our ways of grieving felt so incompatible. Her coping mechanisms only deepened my wounds. Still, one question gnawed at the back of my mind: the crying. How could the doll have been crying? Was it some feature she'd added to make it feel realer? Or was my grief messing with my head? The most unsettling part was that the cries had sounded so much like him. A parent knows their child's cries anywhere, even in a crowd. Later that night, after brushing my teeth, I caught a glimpse of Lily in the nursery. She was sitting in the rocking chair, swaying gently as she hummed to the doll. "Hey," she said when she noticed me lingering in the doorway. "I finally got him to sleep." "That's good," I replied, my voice strained. "Come say goodnight," she urged, standing to place the doll in the crib. My feet felt like lead as I stepped into the room. She leaned over, kissed the doll on the forehead, and then turned to me expectantly. I hesitated before leaning toward the crib. As I got closer, a sharp, sour smell hit my nose. I tried to ignore it, but the stench grew stronger, making me recoil instinctively. My wife stared at me in shock as I gagged, clutching my hand to my mouth. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "I am sorry." "Him." "Not at him." "Okay. He smells like a dumpster fire. What's next? Does he have some kind of built-in sewage system too?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and I turned away, feeling the weight of guilt crush me as my whole body trembled. "Just admit this is all a joke to you. You think I'm losing my mind, that I'm insane. Just say it, Lily." "Actually, don't. Just sleep somewhere else tonight. On the couch outside, I don't care." "Okay." I bolted out of the room before I could break down into angry tears. I felt like such a monster. The pressure of trying to fix both of us was ripping me apart. I curled up on the couch, screaming into the pillow until my sobs wore me out, eventually lulling me to sleep. Suddenly, I was yanked out of my sleep by the sound of glass breaking. My body shot up, eyes wide and searching in a blur. I quickly threw the blanket off and scrambled to find the source. The room was pitch black, so I fumbled along the walls, desperately searching for a light switch. Just then, something sharp jabbed into the bottom of my foot. "Shit! Fuck!" I muttered as I pulled my foot up, now hopping around, trying not to step on more glass. I finally found the light switch and illuminated the kitchen. I looked down at my foot, blood dripping from the small shard of porcelain embedded in it. With a sigh, I bit my cheek, gritted my teeth, and yanked it out. I swallowed a scream, setting the crimson-covered shard on the counter. That's when I noticed the powdery residue on my foot. Limping around, I saw the mess, a shattered cookie jar and flour scattered all over the floor. God damn it! I tied a dish rag around my foot and started cleaning up the glass. The sting in my foot and the mess occupied my mind, and I almost forgot about how the jar had ended up on the floor in the first place. But as I turned to finish, I saw it. Small floury footprints. I froze. The last of my thoughts scrambled together as I crouched down, eyeing the tiny prints carefully. No, it couldn't be. I told myself it was impossible. Who else could have feet that small? Not Lily, not any animal. A cold sense of unease washed over me as I quickly vacuumed up the trail. The prints stretched further than I thought, leading through the living room, up the stairs. My heart pounded louder with every step. The trail led to a door at the end of the hall. That door. I stood there, chest heaving, unsure if I could open it. I just wanted to cry, to scream out my grief. But it felt like I was stuck, haunted by my own emotions. Minutes or hours passed before I finally stepped away, trudging to the bathroom. I checked my foot, making sure there was no glass left, then properly bandaged it. I was too exhausted to think about much else. But the question lingered. Why us? Why me? Why couldn't I just be a husband, a father, a family man? Why was life so cruel? It wasn't just unfair. It was cruel. The cruelty of losing our son after only a month. So fucking cruel. Bandaged up, I limped back into the hallway. But I stopped cold when I heard the crying again, coming from behind the nursery door. For the first time in my life, I prayed. Not for a miracle, but for it all to end. I needed it to stop. But no one was listening. I wiped away tears and walked past the nursery. The cries seemed to fade as I moved farther away, but I could still hear them in my mind. I tried to focus, but all I could do was lie on the couch, hoping Lily would wake up, but she never did. The cries never stopped. The whole night, I lay there, my body shaking as the sound reverberated in my skull. It felt like I was losing my mind, my grip on reality slipping away piece by piece. By morning, the cries had stopped, though I couldn't remember when. "Richard," Lily's voice cut through the silence, her hand on my shoulder. I jolted awake, my head spinning. "Didn't mean to scare you. It's fine. I just didn't sleep." I could see the guilt in her eyes. "Is everything okay? I want to apologize for last night. You've been so patient with me, and I feel like I've been asking too much." We shared a quiet moment, our eyes avoiding each other. "I appreciate that. I'm sorry too. I've been too harsh. We don't have to agree on everything to care for each other." She sat next to me, resting her head on my shoulder. I kissed the top of her head and felt the quiet between us. I wanted to bring up what happened last night, but I knew now wasn't the time. "And about the smell? You weren't wrong. I want to check on him this morning, and the smell hit me hard," she laughed weakly. "Turns out he was molding from the inside. The seller said it happens if they're not kept properly." Tears suddenly filled her eyes as she collapsed into my chest. "How'd I lose him twice?" she sobbed. My heart shattered. "It's okay. It's okay. You can always get a new one." "No, I can't." I gently pulled back to look into her eyes. "Lily, can we be honest for a moment? No hard feelings." She nodded slowly. "It's a doll. You can get a new one." That was the wrong thing to say. She ripped away from me, storming upstairs. "You don't understand. You never did." "You know what? No, that's not fair. None of this is fair," she shouted, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I buried my face in my hands, feeling the weight of it all. They always say grief brings people together, but it felt like it was tearing everything apart. My marriage, my sanity, everything I thought I understood was breaking down. Another workday passed in a blur. When I came home, I was met with a tense wife, still angry, still distant. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked cautiously. "I threw him out," she said flatly. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you?" "Lily, surprised you didn't say thank God. I'm sorry about this morning. I'm trying, I know you see that. But it's hard when you keep losing it like that. Do you want to talk to someone? A grief counselor?" "He was my grief counselor," she muttered. "And now I need another one, just like you said. Right? Right? Whatever works for you." I smiled weakly. She sat with her coffee, staring into space, clearly lost in her own thoughts. I couldn't help but notice how fragile she looked, hanging on by a thread. But I couldn't push any further. It wasn't the right time. That night, she let me sleep in our bed, but we barely exchanged a word. Her legs brushed against mine, but she didn't want to touch me. She needed her space, and I gave it to her. For the first time in days, I slept without the doll in the house. When I woke up, feeling more rested than I had in weeks, I realized Lily was already gone. But when I left the bedroom, I heard humming from the nursery. I was stunned when I saw her cradling it, a new one, as if nothing had happened. "Good morning. I thought you were getting rid of him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I did. This is the new one," she smiled as if nothing was wrong. "Wow. Already? That was fast." "Express shipping," she shrugged, laughing softly. "Sweet." She went to lay him down for his nap. "Could you make me a cup of coffee?" "Yes, sure," I replied, smiling before closing the door behind me. Once she was out of sight, I stood frozen, my mind racing. How could she have gotten another one so fast? It didn't make sense. She was too attached to the last one. But now, she was lying to me, and it hurt. After I made the coffee and waited for her to come back down, I felt unease growing in my chest. This wasn't just grief anymore. Something wasn't right. I was frozen in place, unable to move, and all I could hear was this suffocating, spinning cry, the kind that felt like I was being swallowed whole by something dark and molten. It gurgled. The sound hit me like a shockwave, and in that instant, everything in me snapped. A scream ripped out of me, more intense than anything I'd ever known, like the breaking of a dam. My throat ached with the force of it as I scrambled off the bed, my legs unsteady, and stumbled into the corner of the room. "Oh my God!" Lily's voice cut through the air, her eyes flying open as she tore off her sleep mask and flicked the lamp on. I couldn't stop the cries that came, each one more desperate than the last. My body curled in a tight ball, shaking uncontrollably. What happened? What is it? Itsy. I choked on the words, barely able to speak through the sobs. Oh my God! Lily shot out of bed and knelt beside me. I flinched as she reached for me. What happened? Please tell me. I turned to face her, my eyes wide with fear. Words wouldn't come. Instead, I got to my feet and staggered out of the room. Where are you going? Richard, what's happening? I didn't answer, just threw open the nursery door. My eyes darted around in panic, landing on the crib. Richard, what the hell are you doing? I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Richard, stop. Let's talk about this. Lily gasped as I tore her from the crib. You're right, Lily. This isn't some doll. This thing is a parasite, and I'm getting rid of it. Richard, please, that's our son. No, it's not. She recoiled, tears pouring down her face, her voice shaking as she begged me. Please stop. Don't. I shook it in front of her, rage boiling over. This isn't our son. In one final burst of anger, I gripped its throat and slammed it to the floor with all my strength. In that moment, I learned two things. Caskets are supposed to be bigger, and dolls that are reborn don't have organs. Lily crumpled to the floor, crying out in horror as she stared at the broken remains, grayed skin, ripped open, and organs spilling out, trying to gather the mess with trembling hands. My heart stopped as I looked down, stunned and sickened. Lily, what the hell is this? He doesn't belong there, Richard. He belongs with me. With us.